This is Skip with the Widescreen Gaming Forum. Today we're going to dive into Shadow Warrior 2 with a look at its quality settings and some ultrawide benchmarking with the Radeon Fury X. We recently logged Shadow Warrior 2 into our games database at the WSGF. It received gold certification for widescreen, ultrawide, and 4K. It received silver certification for multi-mod. The game is horizontal plus in all configurations, but there's one major blemish in multi-mod. In the mission screen, the spell cards scale with the width of the display and end up being cut off, as shown here. This doesn't occur with the corresponding gun cards. The game does have an optimized HUD for both 21:9 and multi-mod. You can scale it both larger and smaller from the standard size. This is 100% scaling. This image shows 80% scaling. And then here we show 120% scaling. Additionally, there's a HUD opacity setting. This shows the standard HUD with 50% opacity, now the 80% HUD, and the 120% HUD. It's really great that Flying Wild Hog put in so much thought into HUD compatibility and options. Next, let's take a look at the graphics options. This table shows the detailed settings for each preset. You can see that with low settings, everything's basically turned off and it's quite ugly in-game. Medium turns on half of the features and improves the quality settings. High pushes things further and enables all but one feature. Ultra maxes everything out, with the biggest change being the 4 GB of textures. To get a visual on these differences, here's the opening scene of the game. You can see that low is very ugly with poor texture qualities, no ground vegetation, and bad jaggies on the front of the car. Everything is basically flat and dull. Medium brings significant improvements with better textures, more ground cover, more vegetation, and reflections on the player's hand and sword. High improves things further with a deeper and more natural look. In this instance, the improved ground textures are somewhat hidden by the massive increase in vegetation. And finally, Ultra. I honestly don't see much difference here, and looking back at the settings details, the big difference is the 4 GB of textures, which are hidden largely by the grass. I was able to benchmark the game with my Radeon Fury X. I'm hoping to get an NVIDIA 1080 soon so that I can get a direct comparison between the top single GPU cards, but for now you'll just have to try and judge how much faster or slower your card is than the Fury X. The benchmark run I used was the opening mission through the first boss fight. It lasts right at 3.5 minutes and is easy to repeat. It also combines some open world with lots of vegetation, tunnels with little detail, several water areas, and a few fights. Looking at 3440 by 1440 ultra-wide, the Fury X pulled 57 frames per second average on Ultra, with a minimum of 41 and a max of 77. Dropping the preset improves the average by 10 frames per second, pushing past the magic 60 and landing at 67 frames per second. The max is also increased by 10 FPS to 87, and the minimum creeps up to 45 FPS. On medium, performance continues to improve with the average hitting 79 FPS and the minimums at 53 and the max at 104. I also tested low settings but didn't include them on the chart as it blew out the scaling. Low is completely ugly, as you saw. Its performance almost doubles medium with an average of 140 frames per second, minimum of 102, and maximum of 216. When looking deeper into the data, we see that on Ultra, the 1% frame time translates to 43 frames per second, and the 0.1% translates into 39 FPS. On high settings, the performance is 48 FPS at the 1% and 44 FPS at the 0.1%. By way of comparison, in 1080p Infinity, the Fury X averages 44 frames per second, 34 FPS minimum, and 58 maximum. Moving up to quad 1080p, 4K Ultra HD, we lose 4 to 5 frames on the average and max, but we lose almost 10 frames on the minimum. For my own personal playthrough, I'd pick high settings. The game is really fast paced and I don't actually see the difference in Ultra settings, certainly not while I'm moving. Low quality is horrible and it's kind of ridiculous that the jump in performance is 2 times. If you need to go below medium settings, consider lowering your resolution instead, or you'll need to spend the time tweaking individual settings.